Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. So let me just check. Okay, great. So so for the next 15 minutes, I would like to talk very quickly about what happens when we want to migrate from, let's say, any knowledge management tool to an open source alternative. And I will take the example of what we are doing today within my company and within XWiki to migrate from Confluence, which is one of the most used wikis out there, to actually XWiki. So very briefly before I start, so my name is Clément Aubin. I'm doing sales and also development at XWiki SaaS. XWiki, so our company, we are a software editor. We do the XWiki software, but we also do another solution which is called CryptPad that you may have heard of, that I will not talk about today, but if you wish, we can discuss it afterwards. And we are about 50 employees. We are really engaged in the EU, the digital sovereignty of the EU in particular, and more globally in open source. So we develop XWiki and CryptPad as two open source solutions. XWiki is under LGPL and CryptPad is under AGPL. We are also hiring, so if you are a UX designer or a product designer and you want to work in an open source company, don't hesitate. So, okay, let's dive into our discussion. So I'm pretty sure that from this list, from this list of icons, there is at least one icon that you know about and that you may use on a daily basis. In the room, who doesn't know any of these? No, good. Yes, really? I'm surprised. Okay, so we have Notion, the wiki of Teams. From the chat, it exists. It exists. It's very simple, but it exists. Confluence, of course, that we will talk about. SharePoint. Airtable, Microsoft Loop, the new alternative to Notion that Microsoft released at the beginning of the year, and also HCL Connection, which was formerly known as IBM Connections, which was formerly known as Lotus Connection. And if you know about Lotus Connection, you may have a bit of experience in the business because it's very old. And so, all these tools are knowledge management tools. They all have their own particularity, right? They have their own way of organizing the information. And the question is, when the time comes to migrate, what should we do, basically? What's really the process to migrate? So there are many reasons why you would like to migrate, of course. For example, the price increase. The example that I will use here about Confluence is really, today at XWiki we are taking a lot of requests from migrating away from Confluence because Atlassian, the mother company, the company editing Confluence, has changed her price model, basically discontinuing one of the Confluence offers and raising prices over the product line. So you may want to migrate because you don't want to have that much of a price increase. Maybe to retain control on the data, you don't want to be forced to be hosted on the cloud. And maybe also because you want to have just new features, or you, for some reason, your country is banning tech that is owned in another, tech that can be owned by companies based in other continents, let's say. So, where to start, basically? From what we see, the first challenge that you will have is really about finding a way to extract the information out of the knowledge base that you use, okay? That's the step 0, and it's already quite complicated. Globally, if we look at the list of knowledge management tools that I saw before, most of these tools will provide you with ways to export data, right? But it will be data exported in Word, in PDF, so in formats that don't retain all the metadata that you have in your knowledge base. And with that, you risk basically losing value. You don't get everything. And so if you want to circumvent this issue, two options. One option is to try to find APIs available, hopefully stable, to do data export, or use server backups. Server backups are really nice, actually, because usually when a software, when you have to back up a software, usually the import needs to be quite standardized because the company editing the software doesn't want to have to update their import script every time. Basically, we do a new version, basically. So yeah, looking at what we have with Confluence, in Confluence you will usually have, so Confluence is a wiki, right? They will have pages, sub-pages. These pages will be written in a specific syntax, and usually once you get the syntax right, it's good, unless the syntax changes from one version to another, which can happen if the syntax is not considered as an API by the product. But globally, this allows to have like a good basis for doing imports. So what we did for Confluence, to go a bit more in depth, is that we tried to create at XWiki what we call a migration assistant. The migration assistant is really an extension that you put in XWiki, where you will feed him with some information about your Confluence instance. In particular, for example, if you have an instance which is available on the cloud, you can feed it with the credentials to the instance. And the migration assistant will do like a big part of the heavy lifting about trying to scan the instance, see what is importable, what is not, try to see if there will be any issue when doing the import. And then the assistant itself will take a backup of the server, which we can get from Confluence. And it will do, well, most of the common tasks that you have when you migrate from Confluence to XWiki, which is basically importing the page structure, the pages, the sub-pages, importing the attachments, of course, the history, resolving the links, making sure that the page link correctly to each other so that you keep the value of having a wiki, actually, and converting the pages to a different syntax, which is handled by XWiki, so that basically afterwards you can still edit the pages. Now, the main problem we see when we are migrating is really the details. And the details when it comes to migrating, so every knowledge platform will have its own details, right? We did a migration from HCL connections a couple years ago, and the details were really like the right permissions, and there was a very, very strange way to access files. If you wanted to access an attached file in HCL connections, it was really a mess. We didn't really understood how it was working, basically, and we didn't know how to do the import. So each software will have its own specificities, right? In the case of Confluence, for example, we see these points here when it comes to the macros. Basically, in Confluence, you can use macros that are provided by default when you launch the instance. You can also install extensions that will provide macros for specific features. For example, you want to install a diagram, a diagram tool. You will install an extension. The extension will provide a macro. When you insert the macro in a page, you are now able to add diagrams to your page. Another point, and this is the example that I have on my screenshot here, is the way that the tool handles a specific feature, like group and access rights. So you may have different ways to handle permissions from one tool to another. For Confluence today, the right scheme between Confluence and XWiki is very different. And so usually when we are doing migrations, we have to find a strategy with the customer who is doing the migration, basically the user who is trying to migrate, so that we find the correct way to handling this part. Yeah. So I talked quickly about the macros. What's also important to know is that depending on where you are migrating to, you may not need everything that is being migrated. Some macros don't make sense, for example, when you migrate from Confluence to XWiki. And also some macros may be indicative of a larger feature set. What I mean by that is that for example, if we look at a Confluence instance and we see that you are using the task report macro, it's a very nice macro. It's a very nice macro. It allows to list tasks that you have in Confluence. But then it means that you are using actually a feature of Confluence which is not available by default in XWiki. And it goes beyond just having a macro. It's about having data in your instance which is not stored directly as data in macros, but as structured content in pages. And so we need to identify this before doing the migration so that we are ready to do the move, basically. And so, well, macros can help us identify that in the case of Confluence. When we look at a list of macros, we very quickly know about what is the usage that we have in the Confluence wiki, and based on that, we can really match with what we support today in XWiki, in order to know what can be migrated automatically and what cannot. So today, the solution that we find in our company to do migrations like that, we are trying to develop each macro we come across when we are talking to our clients through consulting. We are trying to develop these macros as open source. The idea is to say that, well, basically, when we are coming across a macro that is present in Confluence, we will try to find an equivalent in XWiki, and if it does not exist, then we will try to add it to the XWiki ecosystem so that people can use it afterwards. And this allows to build a repository of macros, a repository of common tools that, of common macros that can be reused then for later migrations. And then the more we migrate Confluence instances, the better we gain in functionalities and we have better support for the migration, basically. So I have around 3 minutes left, and I want to quickly talk about the financing and how we get to manage to build a migration tool. So what we observed at XWiki is that actually building this tool takes a lot of time. We have to put R&D and we have to put resources that we usually put for building better features for our product. And basically we take these resources and we assign them to a project which is really a one-off for our clients, so which bring value just for the migration itself, and then it's done. So the way we do it at XWiki is that we are doing a system based on recurring subscriptions, basically support. And one of the questions we get asked sometimes is really whether or not the support needs to continue when we migrate from a proprietary knowledge management tool to an open source one. And usually we respond yes. That's what helps us continue to finance and develop the software. One way we managed to build this system to really I would say encourage the use of this kind of subscriptions to continue financing the functioning of XWiki, is that we have a way to sell our support, which is to have so access to a professional support tool, but also open source extensions. Some of them coming with a license, and when I talk about license, I'm talking about an activation license. They are the copyright is LGPL basically, but it's just extensions that will work, that will not work unless there is a license key put in. And this is an interesting way to address to show the importance of actually having support for a tool which is open source, because most of the people will not bother about taking the extension itself, removing the license check, building it, and deploying it on their wiki. Basically, it's too much of a burden. It's difficult to upgrade afterwards, and so most of the users we talk to really just prefer taking the license, the extension itself, along with the support, which allows us then to continue building building XWiki and maintaining it. Yep. So today, that's what we are doing, especially when it comes to the Confluence migration. We have extensions that we identify as being really important and being addressed to a very specific professional use case. We release them under the XWiki Pro macro package, which is an extension which comes with a licensor. that verifies if there is an ongoing support subscription. And the idea is that, well, everyone can download the extension, build it without the licensor, and use it. It's just going to be a bit more of a bit more of a burden, I would say, for you. And I think that's all. So, any question, maybe?